But in the meantime, we'll get started. So this week's Torah portion is Nasso, which is mostly, I think, regarded for its telling of the Sota, the case of the Sota, which is what the article David Gilbert highlighted for us is about. But anyway, also we get some more updates about the different like sub-clans of the Levite tribe and who carried which parts of the tabernacle. Which kind of goes back to the conversation we were having last week about like whether or not these sub-clans are important, and like how today people reportedly still know if their families are Kohens or Levites, but you never hear people say, I'm a Gershonite, I'm a Merarite. I'm not sure how you would say that in English, and whatnot. But we get some of that, break down some more, and their numbers. And then we get more about the Tzara'at, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, about which is it's often translated as leprosy, but more modern scholars say that's doesn't jive. And so we learn a little bit more about what to do in the event that somebody gets Tzara'at, and some other justice concerns. And then we get the Sota situation. So the Sota is a suspected adulteress. There are ways in which this ritual is sometimes seen as troubling for a lot of people. She is brought before the priest. It's, you know, a semi-public, embarrassing moment where she is accused. Then she is made to drink this really gross potion that's like, it's part, so like incantation or like a blessing, a piece of Torah is written on the parchment and then soaked in the water until the ink dissolves, but then it's also mixed with like dirt from the temple floor or the tabernacle floor, which like also then for sure has blood and like animal hair and who knows what else, because that's what happens in the tabernacle. It's not just like sand, it's for sure gross things. It's all mixed together and she drinks it, and if she is innocent, then she'll be fine. And if she did in fact cheat on her husband, then her like uterus will fall out, basically. It says like her belly will distend and she'll have very visible sickly issues that will confirm that she was guilty. And there are parts of that to me that always feel like, you know, like the Salem witch trials, like we'll push her in the water and if she drowns, well, she was innocent, but too bad. And if she swims, she's guilty. Like, how could this thing not make her sick and do weird things to her belly? But anyway, that's the ritual. And I had a mentor who did say, and I appreciate this, it's one of those things where like you have to take a step back from our modern mindset and remember the time and place that it was written, that again, this is one of those areas where it was progressive for its time, because previously, or even like still in certain communities and even within certain Jewish texts of that same time period, like the, you know, a wife is property basically. So he could just beat her or do whatever he wants in private. The fact that he takes her to the priest and has this ritual and has this like witnessing of a holy person, and that there is like recourse for her to potentially for God to prove her innocence and whatever was still a step forward for for the time. Hang on, Joel. I just want to finish the summary, and then we can come back to this. So then after the sota, we get laws of the Nazarite, which the rabbis often connect back to. We get these laws about drinking, and it might be related to Nadav and Avihu and their deaths in the temple, that they maybe were drunk. Then we get the priestly blessings, which is delightful. And then the tabernacle, we get some more detailing of like all the gifts that were brought to the tabernacle, and the the cherubim and the those kinds of we get some descriptive lines about what it all looks like. And Moses does a little bit of accounting. Like he keeps track of what all the gifts that are brought, which is then also used in later halakha as like evidence for the need for transparency in when collecting tithes and other donations from the community. So okay, so that's the whole parsha. Joel, you had a
Oh, sure. I just wanted to ask a question. I'm trying to get in sync with your line of thinking. You said when this was written. So what time frame shall I place myself? Like, when do you believe this was written?
I guess by written I mean generally took place. So physically written, it was probably much later, but we're placing this era of wandering the desert at about 1200 BCE, around there, right? Like King David is the first really archaeologically evidenced piece of the Bible, and we place him at about 1000 BCE. So then you just have to kind of work backwards to figure out some of this other stuff. But even if it didn't happen then, and we're still talking like when was the Torah? We know that the Torah existed in some form by like when did Ezra come back? Like the 5th century CE, thereabouts. So that's still a time period where women were considered property of their wives. So my point still stands across a pretty wide spectrum of years.
Sure. So you mean, according to Jewish tradition, Zaman Matan Torah, the time of the giving of the Torah, which is what you were describing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good.
But even with historical, like I said, I mean, even with historical dating, we know that David is, around 1000 BCE. So if there was a wandering in the desert, if there is any basis for these stories prior to him, then we go back a couple, 100 years or so. And even if there's not, and we're just going by when we know these writings were available, the scroll is still available by about the 5th century CE or BCE. So either way.
Thank you.
Yeah. David Gilbert, welcome. Do you want to, I did pass on your email to everybody about the sota. I wonder if you have anything else you want to say. I was telling Joel and David Bruce earlier that I did not have a chance. I kind of just skimmed that article. I did find it on JSTOR, but I didn't fully read it. So I don't know if you want to tell us a little more about it. But first you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Rabbi Brichto is a little bit of an odd duck, to say the least. His wife is one of the most down-to-earth human beings that I ever met. And I was an auto mechanic at the time, and I missed teaching, and so I taught Sunday school just to keep my hand in. And I just thoroughly enjoyed her sense of humor and so forth. Anyway, so we were discussing something at the dinner table. She'd invited me over, and she said, "Got to read Hanan's article." And I'd never even run across this passage because, to be honest, as a youth and young person, I read through Genesis, Exodus, and skipped to Deuteronomy. And I don't think I knew anything about Leviticus and Numbers at all. And so running across this, I was horrified, to be honest. I thought, the Sota, what is this? This bizarro. And his thesis was, it was one of the very few occasions where there was something done to protect women, that far from being, just as your mentor suggested, far from being an ordeal to which she was being subjected, it was more or less saying to a jealous husband who had no proof, no evidence whatsoever, but was accusing his wife of fooling around. This was a way to put paid to that because there's no higher authority. The curse of God has been written down, slipped in the paper, she drinks it, and God is invoked by this. And if God punishes her with her uterus falling out or whatever, then so be it. That's the punishment. That's it. She's not stoned, not put to death. There is no great hunt for the adulterer. I mean, it's all just drop right there. But if her uterus doesn't fall out, guess what? There is no appeal. She didn't do it, and the husband can say nothing else. That was Hanan's viewpoint. And the reason I thought you and Joel might be interested, because my Hebrew is really pathetic. I can read, I can get some roots, I can sound stuff out, particularly if you give me the English verse, then I can say, oh, that's what's going on there. But I thought you two might be able to follow his exegesis, because he discusses something about, this word means this in this context, but you don't want to apply it too broadly here. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. Okay. Beyond me, guys. So for what it's worth, I thought that was interesting, but what was really interesting to me were three huge sections of this Nasso Parsha, one on the Sota, one on the Nazarite, did I pronounce it right?
Yeah.
And then one on all the gifts, enumerated over and over and over. It looked like all 12 tribes pretty much were giving identical gifts. Almost like don't want to one up one another. The princes all getting together and saying, all right, we're going to make this look good. What's the least we can get away with? Or, we don't want anybody currying special favor here. Let's get this hammered out so that we don't have problems down the road. It was just, as you said, these are the huge sections. And then right near the end is about the most powerful set of blessings that I ever heard. And I remembered them from when I was 7 or 8 years old, and they kept being repeated. And I remember when the blessings were given to me by my grandfather, who was visiting from California, a man who you would think on meeting him that he was illiterate, because I don't think he went beyond 6th grade, but his knowledge of Hebrew and of tradition was amazing. And he would put his hands on my head and on my sister's head on Shabbat, and he would give these blessings. And I tell you, I felt blessed. I really did. And to have those just kind of stuck in there with all these others, I thought, I really should have read this a long time ago, because It's like there are major lessons in this parsha. Don't be jealous and suspicious if you really don't have cause. Don't overindulge in wine or other addictions.
Mhm.
And if you take a vow, then by heaven, you carry it out. You don't let anything get in the way. And then finally, this, I would never have read it, honest. I would have read the first couple of verses of the gifts and said, bag it, I'm turning the page. But this time I read through and I thought, why would they have that with every prince giving the same stuff? And I thought, and write it down? And Moses is taking account, and that transparency that you mentioned. So it just was like, it looks like something you could almost dismiss. And then you look at it again and you say, there's something major going on here. This is telling people really how to live nuts and bolts, you
Mhm.
know? Anyway, those are the things that were going through my mind.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. One of the other things I like about the Nazarite vow, I mean, you mentioned that it teaches, not to overindulge, but I also think it teaches not to underindulge. That's not the right way to say that, but like everything in moderation, right? Because the Nazarite vow is not forever, except for Samson, but it's very clear in his case that it's an exception. That proves the rule, right? Like nobody should give up these things that God provides for us forever. But you take a cleanse or whatever, like you take that time to fulfill your vow and get more in touch with the divine and with, these things. And then you return to normal behavior. Um, and I don't know, I think both pieces of that are really important um, and telling. Uh, unless I think it's on this Parashat too. There's a commentary that like who should abstain forever, like that some people wine brings out their joy and it is a gift from God, and some people it brings out their moroseness or their belligerence or whatever, and that they should not drink, and there is further commentary tied to this about like who should make such vows, but anyway. Safari changed its formatting. I don't like that.
Oh,
Oh well. Anyway, what did anything else catch? Anybody else want to stick on any points here? Yeah, David.
well, it did also seem to me one of the important aspects, I guess you just referred to it, was kind of denying a monastic tradition that
Right.
that you should, even if you're refraining from alcohol, that doesn't mean you refrain from sex. It doesn't mean you don't have any contact with your family at all. And even if you were to push it to say, okay, for this 7-day period or 30 days or whatever I guess it was 30 days that you're going for, you have a responsibility to the community to stay present and to help and to look after other people's needs. Because if everybody is going off saying, well, I really have to be by myself, you've got widows that need to be taken care of. You've got orphans that need to be taken care of. You've got strangers that have to be greeted. So it's almost like, yeah, you can take a break, but don't make it too long.
Right.
And I thought that was, I kind of wondered, because I at one point I was in an ascetic frame of mind, and it occurred to me during this time period that it wasn't very Jewish.
Right. It's yeah. It's not. There's a piece of Talmud comes to mind, and I don't know if it's actually it's a little tenuous, but there's a story of a tzaddik who devotes his whole life to halacha, to Judaism, to Torah study, and then no, I'm telling you, right? He does do those things, but it's not his whole life. He does also travel and take time for himself and indulge in material luxuries and whatever. And at one point, his students ask him, "How can you justify these secular behaviors?" And he says, "When I die, I don't want God to say to me, you know, Plony, I forget what the rabbi's name was, but Plony, I don't want, or I'm so glad that you devoted your life to being a tzaddik, but why did you not see my Alps?" And so now you can visit the Alps and still be ascetic. You can seclude yourselves in beautiful scenery. So that's why I say I don't know. That's maybe a little tenuous, but I think it gets to the general idea of like, if we only devote ourselves to Torah study alone, then it exists in a vacuum, and it doesn't enrich our lives. If we don't engage in Torah study at all, then the earthly pleasures are meaningless, and they don't tie us to anything bigger than ourselves. So it's all about that moderation and that balance. Ein Torah bli kemach. There's no Torah, or lechem. There's no Torah without food, without sustenance. Or as we used to say in Talmud class, Ein Torah bli chocolade.
Maimonides would be proud of you.
We had a very chocolate obsessed Talmud class. Our professor too. It was mostly women students that took to bringing in chocolate for each other. And then we learned that our professor had a particular love of dark chocolate. So then we started trying to like one up each other on how dark the chocolate was. Does he like it with nuts or with fruit or with sea salt or whatever? And yeah, it became a whole thing. But anyway, yeah, Joel.
So what Dave Gilbert just said resonated with me, because it seems like forever, whenever we get to number 7, people are always saying, "Oh, wait a minute, this is the same thing over and over. I think we'll skip the whole thing." Or I'll read the first one and then the rest are the same. Because we think the authors of Numbers 7 had Microsoft Word, and they said you'd cut and paste and they were done. Well, I was shaking my head for the past while. This morning I said, I'm going to check this out. And I did check it very carefully, and it is not identical. For example, 7:13, that they're talking about Nachshon, the carbano. Every other verse, there's no vav. It just says carbano. So I have a theory about that. So it's not identical. And if the authors of the Bible use Microsoft Word, please remember you got to delete the vav. Otherwise, you're going to screw everything up. So next, I said, I better check this. I have some computer programs. Let me run it through a computer program to make sure I'm right, or to find out if I'm wrong. And no, everything good. So of course my next step is, well, wait a minute, come on, let me check Rashi, let me check some other people, and let's see what they say. And I give a look, and Rashi says nothing. And I say, oh, now it's strange. But Rashi picked up on yet another change, and it's right in Rashi's commentary. And so, it's kind of interesting. Let's see, Rashi is, okay, on 7:19. 7:19, he brought his offering. Why is the word hikriv? Now, hikriv is the same root, but I'm sorry, it's a different inflection. And this is what Rashi is telling us. He brought his offering, offered his offering. You could also say that. So with the tribe of Issachar, and he said, why did they say Issachar? Here's Rashi, because the tribe of Reuben came and complained. Is it not enough that my brother Judah has preceded me? Let me at least offer up after him. So anyway, we can always learn from Torah, and we can learn by checking ourselves, and we can learn by looking at the sages, seeing what they have to say. So I learned there are two slight variations in 7. So it's not a strict computer program copy and paste.
Right. Well, they didn't have those. So there's that.
I told you 1914 is when the whole thing was written, and we already had Microsoft Word back in 1914, so we're good to go.
Okay, Joel.
Ein mokdam uma'uchar b'Torah. There is
Sure.
no before, there is no after in Torah. The message is the same. You can mix it up.
I think that only works within Torah itself, not within all of time.
Oh, maybe.
Anyway, but yes, I love that kind of stuff. So to me, I feel like that Vav on 13, I mean, it could be a scribal error, it could be the way he was talking. There are so many things that, like, very tactless reasons that the scribe would write it that way, and it would be encased in the Masoretic text that way. But I love that when, Ibn Ezra and Ramban do this a lot, where they'll latch on to stuff like that and find the theological interpretations of those things. And to me, it's like it doesn't, I don't necessarily buy that on like a historic level that Chazal meant those meanings, but I think it's it's like such the davka beauty of Judaism that you can still find those meanings in the text, from things like that. So anyway, yeah, Joel.
Here's my interpretation. There's no support for this. This is right out of my imagination. I believe that these stories are at least 10,000 years old. They preceded everything that we've studied. They were simply stories that were passed on. And I believe the 10-year-old children who wanted to be the leaders, of course, had to memorize this, because writing had not even been invented. There's no such thing. So you will hear your boyfriends talk about it, and you learn it. It's not impossible. Okay. So here it is 10,000 years ago. And of course, there would be a little test. Okay. Maybe it would be David Gilbert running the Hebrew class over there. And the boys would have to repeat it. And what happens when it sounds so simple that every verse is the same, you get lulled into complacency.
Mm-hmm.
When you're lulled into complacency, you're going to miss the details. I believe for us today, that's the same message. About the sota, just a quick word. We are the sota. A relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the same as the relationship with a husband and a wife. And God is a very jealous God. We hear it over and over. And we have to beware not to have any other boyfriends and girlfriends, and not to be flirting, because there is one creator of the universe. And I read a lot of ancient history. And when I'm reading all this stuff, I go, oh my God, could they actually believe there was a God of the sea and a God of the land, and they were fighting? And come on, there's one God. And I think that was just laid down into our subconscious brains, and we have it today. And we've spread it around the world. And it's the truth. And we see it in modern day physics. We just see it all over today, that it all points to a divine creation. No question about it. No, I don't hear three different gods creating muons and leptons. And no, come on. Higgs boson particles. No, all created by the same force. Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Higgs proton, that's the one they call the God particle, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And it fits perfectly. Perfectly.
Yeah. Well, we see a lot of that adulterous wife metaphor in the prophets. Last week's Parsha, Bamidbar, the Haftarah is from Hosea, which is all of that. I mean, the Haftarah for last week especially is all, you know, all about the adulterous wife, but in that case, the wife is Israel, and how God is going to put Israel through this ordeal to prove her loyalty and all of that. This week, the Haftarah doesn't relate to that part. It's the story of Samson, which I mentioned earlier, because he is the lifetime Nazarite, and he he is that exception that proves the rule of that Nazarite laws or vows should only be for short periods of time. Also, he's kind of a sociopath, so there's that. It's proof that you should maybe let loose a little once in a while so that you don't torture animals.
Isn't the Nazarite almost identical with the Levi'im, with the priestly class? It's a separate, it's a
yes,
relationship.
in that sense. The priestly class doesn't have to do the things that the Nazarite does, but I think the Nazarite, like abstaining from wine, abstaining from haircuts, that kind of removal, separateness to reconnect with the divine, is a means through which non-Levites are given an opportunity to have that kind of relationship with the divine that the Levites are granted sort of by default. So yes, I do agree with you that those are similar, but there's additional stuff to it to get them there.
How about B'nai Israel? Do we have the same degree of separateness that the Nazir has, that also the Levi'im have? Are we set apart from the world in a very special way to proclaim the emet, the truth of creation?
Well, see, here's the problem with when you say it that way, is that, I mean, yes, there is lots of places throughout the Torah and other Jewish writings that B'nai Israel are separate. You know, it's in the Haftarah. It doesn't mean elevated necessarily, but in the, not Haftarah, Havdalah blessings, right? That God created separations between holy and mundane, between Shabbat and the other 6 days, between Jews and non-Jews, between, I'm missing one of the things. Light and dark, I think, is one of the things. Anyway, so that separation is important to B'nai Yisrael's self-understanding and relationship with divine. But the thing that trips me up when you compare it to Nazarites is that the Nazarites and the Levi'im are already part of B'nai Yisrael. So then how can you then say that we're all that? We're all Nazarites or Levi'im when that's already a subdivision of B'nai Yisrael?
I think it's a metaphorical construct. It's a parallelism. And also we read at Genesis 1:4, you just called Lahabdil Bein Or Ubein Boshech. Every morning I wake up, it's either sun or it's either morning or it's evening. There's, and it means separateness. There's a separate.
Right.
So I believe that we were created. Remember, we're not the first human beings. Neanderthal were human beings, Homo, and so many others. Heidelbergensis. Of course, they were not sapiens, but there were so many human forms, and none of them were special. We were selected to be special of all the species that came before us. Okay, so here we moved along, and of course now we need Abraham. He had to be selected because before this, everyone, was all mixed up again. So Abraham was special, and I think it just follows that. And yes, everyone will suffer. All these people suffered. The Nazarites, Nazir. By the way, don't mix it up with Notzrim.
Right.
Word that's Nazarene. So it means separateness. That's the first definition, the very first.
Sure.
Separate. Havdalah is we separate Shabbat from the rest of the week. Okay, Havdalah. The root is Badil. Bet Vav Lamed.
No, you Dalit. Yeah.
To separate. So I always try to keep that in mind first. So how are we separated? And I think the sota is also separated, but in a negative way. It's kind of like a warning, like,
right.
Hey, come on,
but it's a temporary separation if she's innocent, right? Dave, what were you going to say?
I didn't follow what Joel said about the Hebrew, that the root of Havdalah doesn't look to me to have anything like the root of Nazir. What am I missing there?
No, I don't think he was saying that. I think he was just saying that Nazir is about separation.
Yeah.
And Havdalah means separation. That it's the
But
process.
it's not the Hebrew. It's not the
root.
root.
Those roots aren't related, no,
Okay.
but just the process of taking a Nazarite vow means separating yourself a bit. And that separation, I think that comes back to the parallelism he was talking about, that then that separation is like essential to all of how we understand the world. Right? That Jews are separate from non-Jews, that light is separate from dark, prayer or like holy ritual time is separate from mundane time. The Shabbat is separate from Shabbat, and festivals are separate from the other 6 days, that kind of stuff. That those dividing lines are really important in Judaism in ways that, like, I think a lot of people misunderstand. It's not about a hierarchy or anything. It's just about understanding that we live in dualities, and that like, and sometimes we have liminal spaces too, right? Like the Omer is like a weird in between time between holy and mundane. We're between holidays, so it's sort of mundane, but also we're counting and we're being introspective. You know, all of Elul can be that way. Certainly the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are that. Like we do have liminal times. It's not completely binaristic, but like there are two ends to things, and that we like hold both, you know, in our lives is pretty essential to Jewish philosophy, I think.
I had
Yeah.
one other thing on the Sota. This is from Professor Sharon Keller of Hofstra University.
Mm-hmm.
And she interprets Numbers 528 to mean that an innocent wife would be able to maintain her pregnancy when the husband suspected he was not the father. So that within this context of 5:11 to 31, the Sota, an intact pregnancy after the ritual would prove that the husband had indeed fathered the child, so that he would not be able to say, oh, this was from some adulterous relationship, that he had the responsibility and had to maintain the child and fully recognize his parentage, which I thought was I guess that followed, but I didn't think of it. And I certainly didn't get it from Rabbi Brichto's statement. So I thought that was kind of neat that she followed that on that, because there is something in the text that I'm not remembering at the moment, which says something about her, that she will then be able to give birth.
Right.
Progeny or seed or something like that. I don't
Yeah.
remember the phrase, but it's right around that end of it. But I will say that both Rabbi Brichto's little exegesis and just reading what other people wrote really made me take a new look at what's going on in Numbers. I mean, just a whole new area of Bamidbar.
Yeah. We are in the wilderness at this point, you know?
But also like what you said, that we have the holy, we have the profane, and we also have this area that's neither holy nor profane, but more almost like saying goodbye to the holy and in expectation of the holy, just being aware that we're in an atmosphere perhaps of where each act has a significance greater than we might ordinarily ascribe to it. I don't know if that makes sense. Even little things can have a very great effect, and how we do things and why we do them and when we do them is really important. So that I would say before I started Torah study a couple of years ago, and at first I was just doing a little on my own, I didn't really think about giving tzedakah. You know, I had my annual things that I did, but those were mainly, to be honest, for tax purposes. There was no credit accruing to me from that. You know, tax, that's a good thing to do. And afterwards, I began really thinking about it, and I began carrying envelopes in the car filled with cash, so that if I saw someone on a street corner who said, "I'm homeless, please help," I felt it was incumbent. They're asking for help. I cannot pass them by. And so I had something to hand to them. And sometimes it was interesting. I kind of came to know one homeless person fairly well because every week that I drove by, he was in the same place. And every week I'd pull into the parking lot, come on over to him, and found that, in fact, he was homeless, but he was still working.
Mhm.
And I didn't get all of his backstory, but he did construction work, and there were places that he would go to, and he would get that work done. And he felt that he was doing his part. That was the impression I got. He was not, that I'm this helpless person. I'm actually doing stuff, and I merit. I
Mhm.
have merit. So it was an interesting lesson for me. Becoming aware of more in the world than I was before, which,
Yeah.
as my wife has often pointed out, I go through the world unconscious. Just, you don't have sense enough, Dave, to come in out of the rain. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, yeah, you're right.
Sometimes it's nice to hang out in the rain.
It is, but there are times that was not my intention. I was not hanging out with intention. I guess that's it. It's studying
Intent.
Torah has made me more aware of intention.
It's
Having intention.
beautiful.
Sorry it took me so long to get on the stick. I'm going to be 74. Just now coming to it. Oh, well. David
David,
Bruce, what did you think?
yeah, I was
I haven't
just
heard you
gonna
say
say, you
anything.
be quiet.
Well, in this case, I've been enjoying what everyone else has to say about all of this in this section. It's like several sections. I'm surprised by the diversity of the section. First it's inventorying, and then it's cheating hearts, and and yeah, I obviously get the sense of multi-authors and all that because of that.
Mhm.
Because it's hard to put some of them together, but those were some of my big impressions here. Plus, of course, all the specifics. It's amazing that, to me, that Numbers really shows this, how specific things are about. These are the requirements, and you need this much of this and exactly this much of that. And it's always amazing that there was all that involvement back then compared to now.
For sure. I think we have, not we specifically as Jews, but as, I don't know, modern people or Westerners or whatever, we've lost a lot of that community involvement, that like, um, all hands on deck, we're all contributing, we have all got a role to play. We're all marching in formation, all that stuff we see in this part of the Torah. We've lost some of that. But I think, I don't know, that's part of what the Torah comes to teach us, though, right? Is that we're still in it together.
Like wearing masks, we should do it because we're together on it, not let our individual likes and dislikes.
Right. Absolutely. So I want to share this last little piece of Talmud. I guess a fellow rabbi from my rabbinical school sent this to everybody. In this week's Parsha Nasso, Aaron, there's a word missing here. Somebody tells Aaron, Moses tells Aaron and his sons to bless the people and give specific language, as offers a formula for blessing the people, and in return, what we know as the Birkat Kohanim. Rabbi Ishmael says we learn from this verse about a blessing for Israel from the mouth of the priests, but we have not learned about a blessing for the priests themselves. When it says afterward with regard to the priests, and they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. That's 6:27, the very end, after the threefold priestly blessing. The Lord bless and protect you. The Lord deal kindly and graciously with you. The Lord bestow his favor upon you and grant you peace. And then this last piece, thus they shall link my name with the people of Israel, and I will bless them. That is to teach us that the priests bless Israel and the Holy Blessed One blesses the priests. So again, I just feel like that's a little bit about our communal responsibility to each other, that we have human leadership, but they are also in need of blessing, and that we're all sort of just hoping to have that protection from God as we move forward in our lives. So all right, well, I will see you all next week.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Yes.
Very much.
See y'all.